And I think, and I'm going to make a fool of myself here, perhaps, but is it John Newton that wrote Amazing Grace? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. See, I'm not that silly. And then whenever I look at those words, right, there's a couple of wee words in that there that I think just completely encapsulate what it totally means to be saved, to be changed, to be whatever. And it's the I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. There's a lot more words there. I don't know why I'm doing that. I once, but it's about that. It's I once was lost, but now I'm found.
Also, good news for Armagh. This is the podcast that looks at the big questions of the universe and our hearts, and we're doing another podcast on people. And tonight we're delighted to have James Goldie on with us. And it is nice to actually say us tonight and mean that, because Paul is back. So welcome back, Paul. What have you been up to?
Well, do you really want me to tell you the reason it couldn't be on the last one, John?
No, I don't actually. It's a wee bit gross. It's a wee bit gross for everyone listening. So there was a very good reason for the last one. But yeah, but you've changed jobs recently, Paul. So you're kind of more global now, aren't you?
Well, that sounds very glamorous, John. Yeah. No, back in September, changed to work for an organisation from Belfast. Started in Belfast in 1887, and they work in different countries in Africa now. And get to be part of that and see what's going on there. So basically spreading the good news, the gospel, in different areas of Africa and in different ways. So no, it's very interesting, challenging, but very interesting.
Right. And so he's been away in different parts of Africa, overseeing that, which is cool. And he made the big trip to Armagh on Saturday, I'll say, that we're giving out Gospels of Mark on the doors in Armagh there, and he was able to come down. So he's a jet setter, this boy. Jet setter.
Armagh in Africa.
Yeah. Well, we're really glad to have James on. So thank you so much, James. So without further ado, do you want to tell us just a wee bit about yourself, what you do, where you're from, family, that kind of stuff?
Yes, certainly. So yes, I'm James Goldie. I was born way back in 1976. It's funny you say in the 1800s here. I think I'm closer to that than actually the 20th, whatever. I was born in West Lothian in Scotland, to mum and dad, and born into an industrial town, really, in the central belt between Glasgow and Edinburgh. The mining community. Mines closed down in the 80s. The town went to wreck and ruin. It didn't really flourish in any kind of way, as was promised. Unemployment grew, crime grew, and unfortunately addiction rose in the area. So my childhood was kind of spent between two areas. It was around about the age of 13. My mum and dad had separated. So my dad stayed in the family home, and we moved to a different town about maybe 3 miles away. We would come down between parents, would go to my dad's at the weekends and stay with my mum during the week, really. And it was really from that about age there, I was kind of left on my own to do my own thing. I don't really have any memories of a father figure in my life, and I think that this then would shape my teenage years. It shaped my teenage years, and then went on into my 20s. And what I mean by that is that addiction then would rob me of my teenage years. So when a teenager is meant to be going to school, enjoying formals or whatever it may be, I was stealing to feed a habit from a very young age, from about 13, 14 years old.
About 13 or 14, and
yes.
Addicted to what are you? What?
So I would drink, and then I would use like recreational drugs, so like cannabis, different things like that, sniff solvents, all that kind of stuff. But that would lead me on to what I would then eventually become addicted to, which was amphetamine, which is it goes by the street name of speed or ecstasy or things like that, like recreational drugs that during the 90s it was very popular, I suppose, with the rave scene and discos and dancing and all that kind of thing. So from that very young age, my life was shaped into that lifestyle, I suppose trying to find something, trying to find myself, and trying to fill that massive void in my heart, really, I suppose.
I suppose like growing up, that is where like a dad does come in and
Yeah.
helping you to understand, helping his boy to understand
Absolutely.
who they are and what their point is and all that kind of stuff in life.
Yeah. My dad was a worker. I suppose he was a worker, but unfortunately he had his own addiction issues himself. Those addiction issues would then pour over into other issues. I mean, what I mean by that is that domestic violence and stuff. He would occasionally lash out at my mother, never at us boys and never at any of the other children. But as a result of that, I think I spent a lot of time away from my family home. I spent a lot of time at my grandparents. I suppose I was down at or up at my mother's parents, and then I was down at my dad's parents, spending a lot of time away from home, spending a lot of time away from a father figure, I suppose. Never really spent time with him as a son and a parent should do, really. I suppose when I look back, yeah, it was the dad issue in my life. It was that hole that was not being filled with, I suppose, his love or the love of a father. That then, I suppose, later on in life, really, I found it really difficult when I did become when I was saved. It was difficult then to really relate to God as Father, and that became really difficult for me. And I suppose we'll touch on that later on, but I want to really touch on the impact that a missing father really has on a young person's life. As a child, I had no role model whatsoever. The role models that we had were, our peers, I suppose, the older guys that we used to hang about in the park and run about in gangs and things. And it was just, I suppose that's where I learnt my trade, if you will. I learned what it was like, what I thought it was like to be a human. I heard what it was. I suppose it was like to be in this world, and it's because I was totally in the world. And that was from a very young age. I look at my own kids and my children are 10, 12, and 14, and and praise the Lord, they're not. They're just so far removed from the lifestyle that I grew up into, and I suppose that's a really good thing.
Yeah.
But when I grew up, there was just no guidance whatsoever.
So, James, did you not have any spiritual input at all when you were a child? A local Sunday school or
No.
grandparents that went to church or anything?
Well, I come from a mixed marriage. So my dad was a Catholic and my mum was as Protestant. So my I would go between both grandparents, I suppose, and it's, there's I work with people at the moment. I work in probation, so we often look at the ACEs. We call them ACEs. So we talk about adverse childhood experiences. We talk about how these impact and shape a young person's future, I suppose.
Yeah.
So even not discounting the fact that I was already using drugs and alcohol from that very young age. I was also going down to these two different sets of grandparents and being played off each other, if you will. So I'd go to my granny's and they'd say, what are you still going up to that other mob for? You know, and then I'd go to the other granny, and my other granny would she couldn't even say the other people's names. It was that much bitterness and hatred between these two warring factions. You know, you almost sometimes only think it's just here that that happens, but believe me, I believe you me, it's very much alive in rural Scotland, and from a very young age, that was shaping my life from that young age as well. So my dad's mum would often try to tempt me to go to mass and things like this, you know, by offering me £1 or whatever, which was a lot of money way back then, you know, but I never made any money. I never made any money. They would never go. And then the other side would never go to church anyway. It wasn't a done thing. They were only Protestant really in name, I suppose, and supported Glasgow Rangers, which I suppose they thought was the right thing to do. And so there was never any spiritual input whatsoever. I think to get out of the house or to get away from something, I may perhaps maybe went to BBs when I was very young, but I have very limited memories of that. I think I went because there was football at it or something, and you got maybe a wee munch or something, and some food perhaps, you know. But there was never any guidance. There was never any talk about God, even from school, really. I mean, it wasn't even a mixed school. It was just a state school in Scotland, and there was never any mention of I suppose even religion or spiritual talk at all.
So into that then difficult household and dynamics of parents and starting to find drinking, drugs and all of that kind of stuff, 13, 14, 15. How long did that then progress, or how far then did that progress of that lifestyle?
Well, it spiraled out of control really quickly. I suppose that's what addiction does. It sort of it offers you that way out, and it's a quick way out. I suppose if we look at addiction, we look at sometimes we look at addiction as being somebody is just completely addicted to alcohol or the you know, or heroin or whatever drug it may be, or it may be sex, it may be gambling, it may be whatever. Those are only, you know, substitutes for something that's deep underneath. So there's always like this deep lying trauma that the alcohol may only be masking for a short time. And that's what happened. And very quickly, from about the age of 14 to about 15, 16, I had left school because I was addicted. And that then led into, I would maybe get the odd job, perhaps maybe delivering fruit and veg or doing this, that, and the next thing. It was perhaps maybe working for 3-4 weeks, you know, and sustaining that for that short period of time, but then going off on a binge and then just escaping for maybe 5-6 months, and then not being seen, you know, going off into my own world, if you will, and isolating myself from family, friends, you know, community, and hiding away from the world, I suppose, and dealing with those issues on my own. But the only way that I knew how to do that was by getting full drunk or full of whatever. So when I started using, I was about 12, 13. It was recreationally. We'd go over the park at weekends, we'd do whatever. But then it slipped off into maybe once or twice during the week. And then by the age of 16, I'd left school and I was doing it predominantly most days. And then up to about age 18, 19, I would binge, come off, try to come off, do this, do that, you know, stay off for a certain period of time. And then people would come to my door. I'd ask people, I'm detoxing. I don't want anybody near my door. And detoxing is coming off a substance and going it on your own, if you will. Going to the doctors, maybe getting some tablets to come off the alcohol, which is immensely dangerous, really. But I was trying to do whatever I could Yes, that's like that TV show. Where have you gone? I love that, man. I've escaped out to my like there's two double doors here. Nobody can get at me.
Well, that's me saying as well. Now, when I go on this call, don't open the door. They're like,
Brilliant. I love it, man. You should have brought him. So yes, I was trying immensely hard. Again, I refer back to the start when I was saying that I was trying to fill a void in my life. So this was something that was deep, deep ingrained in my heart. And I don't know what that trauma was at that time. I didn't know what it was. Obviously, it was the trauma of my daddy issues, if you want to call them that. You know, the issue that I had with not having a father figure in my life. Those were immensely traumatic at that time. The only way that I could deal with them was just by escaping and escaping, escaping, escaping. When I came off, I was flooded with all these memories, with all these kind of, fears, anxieties, worries, and like making myself physically sick, that I couldn't deal with that. And the only way that I could deal with it was to go back and continue doing what was making me more sick in the first place. That's why addiction's so complex, because we look at addiction and we go, well, this is just as simple as somebody coming off whatever they're doing. So if someone is a gambler, just stay away from the whatever. But they're always chasing that high. They're always chasing that buzz, the next fix, because I think there is something majorly flawed in their, I don't want to go into genetics or whatever, but it's like in their soul, they're lost. And I think that I know now what that remedy was, but back then at that point, I had literally no idea. And I make reference to this in a book that I penned, and it's just simply at that point in my life, I literally no hope whatsoever. I didn't contemplate suicide at that point. I didn't contemplate self-harming there, like a couple of my friends had done. I was friends with a few people in Edinburgh when I went to rehab in Edinburgh. And I remember one guy kind of peeling back his arms, and it was like train tracks all the way up his thingies. And obviously he had the pin marks in here where he had been using as well. He'd been using heroin. And I remember asking him, because I had no concept of what this was. And I remember asking him, and I said, what is that? What happened? What happened to you? What are you? I literally no idea what that was. And that was his escapism, if you will. That was his way of dealing with the trauma and his past and stuff like that. And then when that stopped working, he was older than me, by the way. And when that stopped working, the only thing that would work for him, or would work for him, obviously, was opium, was heroin. And then he started off smoking it, and then he started off injecting it. And then he then got to that point where he was broken, and he was considering suicide. And then he found Jesus. And it was remarkable to see. And when I was first introduced to him, I remember I was in a hostel in Edinburgh, because I came to this point in my life in my hometown that I had burnt every bridge. Like, I think if you know anybody that has issues, or has like addiction issues or mental health issues, or they have a tendency to burn bridges. They have a tendency to kind of be alienated from friends, I suppose, or family, or this kind of stuff. So whenever that happened, I was absolutely ostracized from the town. I couldn't go down to the town. Used to go down to the town, you used to be able to kind of go into the shop and, get something maybe on layaway, or maybe get it now, pay later, etc., all that kind of stuff. There was just no way and that I could do that anymore, because I completely burnt every single bridge. I'd burned bridges with my family through years of sort of kind of taking, stealing, and just robbing them blind, with absolutely no moral compass whatsoever. I just didn't care. And when that cut off happened, I suppose it was the straw that broke the camel's back, because I kind of went away. I had to go away. I had to move away from the area. I moved then. If I can, I'll share this. I suppose before I met Jesus, I believe that God really spoke to me. I think he spoke to me prior to becoming a believer. When I was, I remember one time I was laid out in my flat, and I was coming off the alcohol. When you come off the alcohol, it's very, like I said before, I make reference that it's very dangerous. Like you can go into sort of kind of seizures and stuff like this. So I was coming off the alcohol. I was laid out on the floor. I had taken some tablets to sort of try and kind of monitor whatever I was coming off. But I was completely sick, and I was doubled in pain, and I was lying on the floor. And when I was laid down on the floor, I remember there was a thought came into my head, of go to Edinburgh and go to there's a place in Edinburgh that you have to go to. And I remember kind of laughing and saying, Edinburgh is just not a place that I want to go. My mother she's from Glasgow direction. All of my memories have been of going through the west, never going east. I had really bad memories of Edinburgh. I just didn't want to go anywhere near the place. And it's really funny because God has such a sense of humor that, this place that I didn't want to go to, he ended up taking me there. And that's where I met Jesus. So when I ended up in Edinburgh, I ended up in this hostel. It took me about a week to get into it because there was waiting lists, there was people staying there. It was sort of kind of go back every day, check and see if there's bed space, check and see if there's bed space. And this was right bang in the middle of Leith. And Leith is this sort of harbour area of Edinburgh. It's kind of like its own wee city in itself. It's massive. There's lots of crime, there's lots of kind of addiction, there's lots of heroin, there's lots of temptation, really. And in the midst of all that chaos, in the midst of all that mentalness, there's a beacon of light. There's a place that I went to, and it's called Bethany Christian Trust. And that's where I ended up. And I ended up there, and I ended up going to the hostel first and then going on to the centre. And when I was in the hostel, they kind of recognised, obviously it wasn't that hard to see that I had an addiction issue. And they were able to then pinpoint the needs that I needed to sort, the support that I needed. And then they put in place a wee package. And then they asked if I wanted to utilise this and go on to their addiction centre. But prior to that, I remember chatting to a couple of the workers, because all the workers there were born again believers. And I had absolutely, like I said before, literally no concept of who God was, literally no concept of the gospel, literally no concept of spirituality in any sense of the word. I had no idea what it was like to be a believer. I had no idea who Jesus was. I thought it was a curse word, really, to be honest. Whenever you sort of, stub your toe or do whatever, it was like we always just kind of thought that was a gentler curse word than whatever. And now I know very much different. But whenever I remember chatting to this one worker, and his name's Danny, and I'll never ever forget him. He was the cook in the place in the centre and the hostel, sorry. And whenever I would go down for food, you'd go down for food every day, 3 times a day, they'd feed you and things like this, And at this time I was still using, by the way. I was still using because I wasn't a believer yet. I didn't know who Jesus was. But this man spent time with me every single day. And he would make it his point to spend time with me and to ask me about who I thought God was. Now, he had a weird way of going about it, because he would always kind of go, have you met with Jesus yet? Do you know Jesus yet? Have you met Jesus? Come on, man, you must have met Jesus yet. And I telling you, I coming from that back, I don't know what you're talking about, mate. I don't know what you're going on about. What room's he in? type thing. You know, like, I don't know this Jesus guy. Is he up the stairs in one of the rooms? What, I don't know what you mean. But he would always take the time to sit with me. And he would, you know, I would eat away and he'd chat away, you know, and I would then start going down afterwards, you know, and sitting chatting with him and spending time with him and getting to know him and how he used to drink himself, how he used to beg on the streets of Edinburgh, how he was a broken no-hoper, and how this Jesus had came in and how he had saved him from his sins. And again, this was just completely alien to me. But at the same time, there was a seed being sown and there was something happening. So from that point there, I had been introduced to the gospel. And then I then move on to the rehab. I stay there for a short period of time. I think I'm doing well. And then I move out and I last 5 hours and I'm drinking again. And I make reference to that because I want to say that up until that point, I had tried everything on my own. I had done what I thought was the right thing. I was ticking the right boxes. These people want me to go to rehab. I'll go to rehab. My mum thinks it's a good idea. My dad thinks it's a good idea. I'll tick them boxes. I'll go down to rehab. I'll do whatever I need to do. I was doing it for everybody else, and I really wasn't doing. I wasn't doing it because I needed to do it. I was doing it because I wanted to please other people. I wanted to sort of, get people off my back, if you will. But at this point, I still didn't know who Jesus was. And I remember I sat back with that guy, Danny, and I sat in the kitchen again, and I sat down with him. There was another fella lingering about. I think it was meant to happen on this day. And this guy was called James as well. And James was this nice fella and all, and he was a worker in the hostel. And they were both sitting down with me, and Danny again, and being who Danny was, he just said, "Right, you ready or what?" And I said, "Do you know what, guys? I think I am, because you're annoying the life of me, right?" And I make light of that because I think at that point, I think I knew who Jesus was. At that point, I knew that he wanted to set me free from my addiction. He wanted to set me free from my past hurts. He wanted to come into my life. He wanted to be my savior, but I was holding him back. I wasn't ready. I wasn't wanting to do that. I was so stubborn, and I was so kind of, brazen. I didn't want to actually go forward and take that step. But that day, I accepted. And I'd love to say, I make reference to this as well. I'd love to say that, it was all peachy afterwards, put on a new suit, swept my hair over to the side and grabbed a Bible under my arm and walked out to church, and everything was fine. It wasn't. It was a massive, it was a massive change in my life. But at the same time, I was only getting changed from the inside out, if you will. So I had repented. I had got down on my knees. I had accepted Jesus as my savior. I had accepted that I couldn't do this on my own. I accepted that the only hope for me was Jesus Christ. I accepted that if I continued kind of going down my own way, my own, what do you call it, my own road, that I was just going to end up and ruining my life. And I think I would have passed away. I think, when I look back at it and I go, the trajectory that I was going at, I was going to die. But now I know I'm going to die, but I know where I'm going. And back then, I didn't know where I was going, and that's why I think I continued to do what I was doing, because I'd literally no concept at all about the gospel, about how it sets us free. I had no idea that Jesus cares for us, Jesus loves us, Jesus went to the cross for us. I had no idea that the Father's heart is for us. I had no idea that the father wants to be a father. And I didn't know how to deal with that. But through time, it became a reality. And I think that's what it happens sometimes. You know, sometimes we think that, you know, that it's, you know, lead somebody to the Lord and straight away they're completely fixed. I'm here to tell you it's not the case. I'm 25 years saved and I'm still a work in progress. I'm completely, you know, so far off the mark, but I'm striving, if you know what I mean. And I'm trying.
I think all of us would agree that
Yeah,
we're definitely, it's not like clean sailing after that.
absolutely.
It's definitely a work in progress.
Yeah, James. So I just imagining someone like yourself who, let's say, has no background. Earlier on, you said you had no spiritual input growing up. And then people say, you know, I was listening to some of the words that you use, you know, have you met Jesus? And I think that would sound really strange. And you said that, you know, who is that?
Yeah.
And then you said God spoke to you.
Yes.
And then you said, you know, I accepted Jesus. And I think if there was someone like you listening to you now,
Yes.
that sounds, it's sounding, you know,
Yeah.
you're doing what
It's
somebody
ironic,
did to
right?
you.
Yeah.
Yeah. So how would you basically translate that to someone 25 years ago self?
Right. Okay. Yeah. Well, I think John knows me. I play music. I love music. I write poetry. I write
Brilliant, by the way, as a singer-songwriter. Just
I write songs and things like this, and I absolutely adore it. And I think that if I was to term what I think that, and I remember to what Danny used to say. Danny used to say things. Are you washed in the blood yet? Are you washed in the blood yet, kid? Come on, man.
Stuff like that.
You get Jesus. You get Jesus. Yeah, come on, man. And you know what I mean. And how's your walk with the Lord? All this kind of really odd, and even the word saved, and even the word what do you call it, repentance, and all these different kind of words and stuff like that. And I think, and I'm going to make a fool of myself here, perhaps, but is it John Newton that wrote Amazing Grace? Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes. See, I'm not that silly. And then whenever I look at those words, right, there's a couple of wee words in that there that I think just completely encapsulate what it totally means to be saved, to be changed, to be whatever. And it's the I once was lost, but now I'm found. I was blind, but now I see. There's a lot more words there. I don't know why I'm doing that. I once, but it's about that. It's I once was lost, but now I'm found. And to actually throw those words out. I mean, I often I lead worship in church, and I often say, and whenever I'm doing it, I kind of say, let us not be a people that just look at words on a screen and just recite them without actually knowing fully what those really mean. I mean, there are some wonderful, wonderful songs out there. Not ones that I've written, but there are wonderful songs out there. And I think one of my favorites is How Deep the Father's Love for Us. I think because of my own past issues with father issues. And then Amazing Grace. I think like I cannot get enough of it, like, you know. And those words, I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. I mean, just to even come out with those things, it's just an amazing, it's an amazing concept because, you know, you think of God's grace is for anybody, from the man that we meet on the street begging to the man walking by him, giving him 100 quid or £10, or I don't know where he's getting 100 quid for or whatever, but you know, like walking by somebody and throwing a pound in. God's grace is for him. God's grace is for him. They're both lost, you know, and I think that's what the most exciting thing about the gospel is, that it's just not for, you know, a specific person. It's for everybody. you know, and I think that the more that we grasp that, the more that we kind of, you know, if I had known that in my youth, where would I be? I don't know. And
you said then, whenever Danny sat down and said, well, what about it? Are you ready? And then you
yes,
said, I think I am ready. So
yeah.
if you were to translate that, what did ready look like? What did that mean?
I think I'd heard, I don't want to make this sound bad. I'd heard enough, but I think I'd heard enough. I'm a, I'm a, I'm a person that like, I actually wrote uh, a wee thing the other day. I do a wee thing for UCB Ireland, you know, like a wee morning motivation.
Okay.
I was just like I was footering about with something the other day, and I came up with the concept of that we all have doubts, a bit like doubting Thomas. You know, the idea that God can take that doubt and make it grow into faith. So that's you know, we look at Thomas, we see how it happened by him. I need to see these holes. I need to see it. I need to see it. And then obviously Jesus comes and shows him, and that's that Jesus coming into his life. That's Jesus showing him who he is, and the doubt then changes to faith. And then we look at the verse in 2 Corinthians 5 verse 7, where it says, you know, correct me if I'm wrong here, but blessed are those who believe but haven't seen. You know, but it's that's the essence of faith. And I think to look back at that point, my faith had increased, if you will. I had listened to what these folks were saying. I had heard the gospel every day from Danny in some way, shape, or form. I had been going to wee church meetings every now and again when somebody would come and you know, there was a nice lady as well. She was an older lady, and I'll never forget her. Like, and she used to work in the hostel, I think 1 day a week, but she would make it her point to come down and pick me up every Sunday evening and take me to a church service. Now, it was a, it was a Church of Scotland service, and it wasn't very good. I'm not dissing the Church of Scotland here, but it wasn't very good. It was very stuffy. I spent the majority of the time looking down and checking out different people's handbags, going, oh, I could take that there, and I could do this, and I could do that. And I always remember when the service was finished, because the heating would turn off, and this big heater would make a noise that it was closing, and I would know that the service was finishing. I really wasn't getting anything from that meeting, but at the same time, you know, God was speaking through these times. And I know that again, what are you talking about? That God was speaking through these times. I was going to church. I was meeting with other believers. That wee lady had given me a Bible. I was going back, I was reading. Your man Danny had told me, go. I said, what? You know, he had given me a Bible and all, or gave me wee notes and things like this, because I wasn't dismissive of him all the time. I wanted to listen to him. I wanted to hear what he had to say, because I wasn't pig ignorant. At the beginning, I was probably taking the mickey a wee bit, but at the same time, the further I got to kind of know him, the further I kind of thought that this guy's for real. And his faith thing is for real here. There's something that has happened in this man's life, and you could see it. And I think that's what faith does. That is what faith does. Faith comes into a person's life, changes the person from the inside out. Now, on the outside, this man was mad. He had a couple of tattoos over his face. He had a skinhead. To look at him, you would walk the other side of the road. And sometimes when he opened his mouth, you would walk over the other side of the road as well, when he started to talk about getting washed in blood and stuff. But whenever I then spent time with him, it was a process that happened, and I started to see Jesus through him.
And that's a really cool way of putting it. Like, it was a process if you come in to believe, like, and even just, you know, you think of Thomas, and Thomas, like, looking at the Lord, had lots of different kind of evidences that he could see. And even just from your life there, there's a lot that you're seeing. So you're seeing a guy in front of you.
Yeah.
There's something real about him. You're
Yeah.
hearing the word being taught. You know, the Bible says faith comes by hearing, and hearing by the word of Christ.
Yeah.
And all of these different things in your life, and gets you ready to a point where you could say, I believe that. And it's that all of those different levels of evidence in your life. And like the point, like you were at a pretty low point, and
Yeah.
you need it. And just even thinking about that amazing grace, like, you know yourself, grace means God's gift to us, and that's what you needed. Like you talked earlier on about the fact that you were trying to do it either to please other people or trying to do it for yourself. And you got to a point where God now just gives you it. You don't need to work for it. You don't need to earn it, because you can't do it. And God gives you this gift that he has won in Christ for you. And you accept it, and your life is changed. Now you were blind, now you see. You were lost, now you're found. And that's a class story, James, and a reality. It's not just a story, fairy tale. It's a reality in your life. But tell me this, because you've talked about this amazing story from where you've come from and all the rest. How has your life changed and transformed now?
Well, I mean, if I was to transform my life right now, if I was to transform back to that period of time, when I was in the flat in my hometown before I left to go to Edinburgh, I would think that no, you're talking madness here, because it's a complete turnaround. You know, when you talk about transformation, you talk about repentance, you talk about the turning around. It's completely the opposite direction. You know, I'm married to Gillian, who I met when she was working in Edinburgh, in the rehab. So she was one of the workers, and she came home to Northern Ireland. I then went on to work in the rehab, and I worked there for 2 years. And during that 2 years, I then decided, do you know what, that girl from Northern Ireland wasn't that, you know, she was pretty special. And I remember way back in 2001, just before the world changed, you know, with that massive thing that happened in 2001, I get on one of them wee tiny telephones and I say, well, Gillian, what's the story? And she was like, how's it going? And I said, you know, blah, blah, blah. And we agreed to meet up. I then came across to Northern Ireland for the very first time. Guys, the very first time I'd ever left the country. Because I'd never went on holidays. I'd never left the country. I'd never went, you know, like my life was the life of an addict. Addicts, we don't tend to go on holiday. You know, we spend all our money on foolish, stupid stuff. And I remember the very first time coming across here and being on a plane and thinking, you know, I better get settled in, you know, for this big long plane ride, and getting up and then coming back down and then going, is that it? It was like 20 minutes in the air, and we were here, and I was in this, like, I suppose this new place. I met Gillian, we wandered, we decided, we moved forward, and then I moved here in 2003. I started working in a church in Belfast, in Fisherwick, Presbyterian, as an intern, as a 27-year-old intern, or 25 or 26 or something. And everybody else was like 18, 19. I was this old wise head. It's like I was like a 13-year-old because I was mad in the head. But I was on fire for Jesus at that point. I was in love with letting people know where I came from, like I still am. And that fire had ignited something within me to work with people. So then I did the internship, moved on, worked in a hostel, and worked in hostels for the next 16, 17 years, just meeting people where they were at. You know, young people affected here by the Troubles, young people here affected by abuse as children, young people here affected by crime or addiction or mental health issues, old people affected by the same things, ill people affected by all these different things. And I developed a real love for and a real passion for that work. And I worked in a hostels in Belfast and up in Derry. I worked in different hostels. I worked in Lisburn. I worked all over the place, working in homeless hostels where I once was. And I think I look back in that and I go, what better thing for me to do? Do you know what I mean? I always come up with I came up with this stupid wee analogy of why I did what I do and why I do what I do. And I came up with this thing saying, well, a baker bakes cakes and a butcher butchers meat. So why wouldn't a drug addict work with other drug addicts? Do you know what I mean? Why wouldn't a recovering drug addict, why wouldn't a past addict not work with people who are hurting and in the same position, not the exact same position, but similar to where I came from, and why would I not do that? And so, yeah, for that period of time to about 2019 there, I worked in hostels. In between that time, myself and Gillian got married. We started serving in a church in Belfast. We started doing a wee bit of music and different stuff like this. Gillian plays the piano as well. We started doing different bits and bobs. And then children started coming along in 2010. Yes, 2010. And then 2012, and then 2014, and then we had a stillborn in 2018. And we then moved down here to Fermanagh. And then we started serving a church down there in Castleberry, where I met John several times, and I've been blessed to do so, blessed to kind of share in some music and different things like this. And now I work for the civil service. I work in probation, and I work with people who are specifically at the moment, I'm working with young people, young males, young violent males. And what I'm doing is trying to impart some of that kind of knowledge that I have, and also to try and deter them from future mistakes going down that same road that I went down. And if I can do it with one person, then I think I've done my job very well.
Well, that's amazing to hear that whole transformation. That's just incredible. Like that whole, I once was lost, but now I'm found, is very, very applicable to you there. I'll ask you one question, just as we kind of come to a conclusion. You chatted earlier on about your father and how that actually, well, I'll say hindered, you can use the word but you would use, hindered your understanding of who God as a father is. How did you get through that, or is that still a work in progress, or how then now do you approach God as father?
It was a work in it's still obviously we're never perfect, are we? We're never sort of kind of fully, my dad passed there in 2016 at a very young age. Now 2016 he passed away. He was 59 years old, and he died of alcoholism and obviously issues related to a cancer. So when I at that point, I think up until that point, I was at a point where I had learned that God loves us as a father, but his love is different as an earthly father. It's so much more. It's much more complex than our father here on earth, because our father here on earth is just immortal, and he's just a fallen person as well, same as ourselves. He's a sinner, and he needs repentance. He needs to turn his life around. He needs to accept Jesus. When I look back on that, I see many missed opportunities that I had with him to share the gospel with them and stuff like that. And I remember dealing with that so many different ways. So the way I dealt with it in the beginning was to just completely ostracize him away from me because I didn't want anything to do with him. So in the beginning, when I first got saved, I just didn't want to know him because I, my earthly father, if you will, I think that at that point I wasn't ready to go and even speak with him. Because I mean, the only way that I could have spoken with my dad before was with alcohol or with drugs on me, and it gave me the confidence to go and speak, I suppose. And then when I got saved, it was again that using that word, it was a process. It was sitting down with folks like me. You know, I remember sitting down with a guy. His name's Alistair, and he was an older guy in the wee rehab that I was in, and he was a father himself, and his actions had sort of alienated him away from his own children, if you will. So he was dealing with it in the opposite. So like me and him got to chatting, and we got to, you know, rub off each other. And I would, I suppose in some sort of way, shape or form, I gave him a wee bit of advice of what it was like to be a child and looking up at a father who was in the wrong or maybe had wronged him. And he was able to do the same, if you will. And through doing that, I was then able to go back out to my dad. I was able to go to his house. I was able to sit down with him. I was able to meet him in his place and sit down and discuss things and discuss the past, discuss the future, discuss what it possibly could look like. And that was quite difficult to do. But at the same time, I was glad I did it. Because when I went to him, he apologized for his, I suppose, behavior in the past. He sat me down and he said, "Look, I'm really sorry." You know, and at this point, he was actually abstinent from alcohol himself. He was trying hard. He was trying to kind of stay off drink. And he was in a place at that point where he was, you know, I suppose, reflecting on his own life, and which would have been a wonderful opportunity for me to share the gospel with him. But that was one of those missed opportunities. I suppose because I went there with an agenda myself to deal with the stuff that it just completely, it just left me, and I didn't get that opportunity to do that. So at that point there, we made amends, if you will. We made amends, and then we sort of kind of just drifted apart again. And you know what it's like, guys. You know, life has a habit of just slipping off.
Yeah.
And the next thing you know, it's 5 years. The next time you know, it's like, I think I maybe should go and see my dad again here. And then the next time I went to see him, he had obviously been drinking again. His wife had passed, his new wife, sorry, had passed. My half-sister, his other daughter, had moved out at a very young age, 13, to go and stay with her sister. And it was just this difficult time again. And again, it was that imprint again in my head of what a dad looked like. But I remember, you know, at that point, like, you know, seeing the heart of the Father, reading those words and how deep the Father's love for us is so vast beyond a measure that he would send his only son to make a wretch like me and ourselves a treasure, his treasure. And when I looked at those words, I remember it was a point where I came to, and I just said, you know what? My dad is a fallen man. He's you know, he's a sinner. I realise that now. I wish I'd realised that way back then. But I came to a point where I kind of realised that, and I knew that there was nothing that I could do for him, but there was everything that God could do for him. Started praying for him. Continued to pray for him. Continued to pray and continued to pray to God. And, you know, it was just a difficult process, really. And so, like, to look at the heart of the Father and to look at, God being a father was very difficult. But again, it was that realization that he's not like our earthly fathers or earthly role models or earthly whatever. He's God. He's the creator. He is.
That's a huge one. Like
Yeah.
that's a huge one. No earthly father is perfect.
No.
God is perfect.
Yes.
And you almost have to make that dichotomy between.
Yes.
I think it's class that Christianity, it gives you the resources to go back to your father, to forgive, to mend the relationship. That's class, like the way that can happen. And it's brilliant that did.
It's about restoration, and it's about restoration and, the rebuilding of bridges, like Jesus is the bridge between ourselves and the Father. And then he allows that bridge to happen again, I reconciled with my brother, I reconciled with my father, reconciled with my mother, both grandparents, all of these people that I'd wronged in my life. And Jesus allowed that restoration, if you will, and I suppose that's the heart of the Father, isn't it? That restoration.
I'm very different than yourself. I have the opposite story where I had loads of input.
Yeah.
But the words are still true. You're still lost. If you're, as you mentioned, everybody is. So very, very different. But you say God's grace is for everybody. You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah.
And so it is. I always find it kind of amazing, but also humbling and all of that to hear your story, and then also be challenged with how you, from becoming a Christian, then your life has been completely different. And for someone like me who grows up in it, or maybe now my children, it can end up looking it's nearly, you settle at some sort of normal. You're not really bad, but you're also not living the way maybe a transformed person should be living, someone who actually has been born again. So I find that challenging, but it is amazing to hear what's happened in your life. Amazing.
And it's interesting, just one last thing is that I often had this sort of kind of to and fro with my wife, because she's similar to yourself. She grew up in the church. She became a believer at 7 or 8 or whatever, accepted Jesus into her heart at that very young age. And we often kind of thought, how God has a massive sense of humor, doesn't he? Like, like to put the both of us together, like we're completely opposites, like, and I then said to her, but like we both had the same issues when we were growing up. We both maybe dealt with rejection. We both dealt with, like fear, anxiety, paranoia, or whatever. We all have issues in our life, but sometimes we deal with them differently. Right. So you grew up, I'm pretty sure it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows all the time. There would have been, a couple of wee things that maybe went wrong, but you had guidance and you had things there. I had no guidance whatsoever. The only guidance that I had was at the end of a bottle. Do you know what I mean? To go and get another one or whatever. And so that's one thing that I often think back and I look, even if my life had been like yourself, like growing up in church, I still would have needed Jesus. I still would have needed to be saved. I still would have needed to be repenting of my sins. I still would have needed a savior. And that's really, that's what the gospel is, isn't it? And that's why it's for everybody. And just, and that's why it's amazing.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Great. Well, we'll end on that point, because like the gospel is just class, and the Lord is class, and I do want to recommend him to you if you are listening to this. And I will say that if you are listening to this and you might be in a similar position to James and you want to reach out, please do. We'd love you to get in touch. And I'd love you actually to put you in touch with James, and he would love to spend a bit of time with you. And I will say as well, because there are probably 2 hours more extra content of James's story, that he has written it down, and it's called From Hope to Full Joy. Is that right?
From no hope
From no
to
hope
full joy.
The Full Joy. And there's a book on Amazon there you can get his life story, or you can download some of his tunes or follow him on Facebook. And you'll hear a lot of his content there. James, thank you so much. Really appreciate you coming on, and Paul as well. Appreciate you being here as well. And thank you as well for listening. And I hope this has been a help to you. Do get in contact with your questions. We would love to hear from you. But for now,